My daughter-in-law, Rachel, snatched my phone right out of my hands during Sunday dinner and declared I was addicted to technology like a teenager. My own son, Marcus, just sat there nodding as she powered it off and locked it in their kitchen drawer, saying they were doing this for my own good, because I needed to live in the real world. They had no idea that phone contained access to the entire digital infrastructure of the company that signs both their paychecks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Diane Walker, and I'm 68 years old. Last Sunday, my family decided I was too connected to my phone and needed an intervention. What they didn't know was that I wasn't scrolling through social media or playing games. I was monitoring the cybersecurity systems for TechFlow Industries, the company where both my son and daughter-in-law work, completely unaware that the quiet woman they treat like a technologically challenged grandmother actually built half their digital security protocol. The whole mess started 3 weeks ago when I made the mistake of checking my work alerts during Marcus's birthday dinner. Rachel had spent hours preparing this elaborate meal, complete with color-coordinated napkins and a playlist she'd curated specifically for the evening. I should have been more present, I know that now, but when you're responsible for protecting a company's entire digital infrastructure, you don't get to take nights off. Hackers don't respect family dinner time. My phone buzzed with a security alert from our Mumbai office. Someone was attempting to breach our client database, and the automated systems were asking for manual override approval. I discreetly pulled out my phone, typed in a quick authorization code, and resolved the issue within 30 seconds. I thought I'd been subtle about it, but Rachel's sharp eyes caught the glow of my screen. "Diane," she said, her voice dripping with that particular tone she uses when she's about to lecture me about something. "Can you please put that away? We're trying to have a family moment here." I apologized and slipped the phone back into my purse, but the damage was done. For the rest of the evening, every time I so much as glanced toward my bag, Rachel would clear her throat meaningfully. Marcus, bless his heart, just looked uncomfortable and kept changing the subject back to his promotion at work, completely oblivious to the tension building across the table. That night set the tone for what would become a 3-week campaign of passive-aggressive comments about my phone addiction. Rachel started making little jokes about how I was glued to that screen, and how people my age should be enjoying life instead of staring at devices all day. She'd say it with a laugh, but there was an edge to it that made my chest tighten. The truth is, I've been working in cybersecurity for over 40 years. I started when computers were room-sized monsters and programming meant punch cards. I've seen the digital world evolve from simple networks to the complex, interconnected systems that run everything from banking to healthcare. When TechFlow Industries was just a startup 15 years ago, they hired me as a consultant to help them build their security infrastructure. I liked the work so much that I stayed on, eventually becoming their chief security architect, though I've always preferred working remotely and keeping a low profile. My family has never understood what I do for a living. When Marcus was growing up, I told him I worked with computers because explaining network security protocols to a 10-year-old seemed pointless. As he got older, I assumed he'd become more curious about the specifics, but he never asked, and I never Even when he started working at TechFlow 3 years ago, he somehow never made the connection between his mother and the security systems he used every day. Rachel joined the company last year as a marketing coordinator, and she's been nothing but dismissive about my computer hobby ever since. She assumes I'm just another older person who got a smartphone and doesn't know how to put it down. The irony is that I probably understand technology better than most people half my age, but I've never felt the need to prove that to anyone. The Sunday dinner incident happened at their house in Maplewood Heights, one of those planned communities where every house looks similar and the homeowners association sends strongly worded letters about lawn maintenance. Marcus and Rachel had invited me over for what they called family time, which usually meant Rachel would cook something elaborate while Marcus talked about work, and I pretended not to notice when they exchanged meaningful looks about my quirky habits. I should have seen it coming. The past few weeks had been particularly intense at work. We'd been dealing with a series of sophisticated attacks on our client networks, and I'd been pulling longer hours than usual. That meant more time on my phone, more urgent calls, and more moments where I had to step away from family conversations to handle emergencies. From Rachel's perspective, I'm sure it looked like I was being rude and distracted. She didn't understand that when I stepped out to take a call, I might be preventing a data breach that could affect thousands of people. She just saw an older woman who couldn't put her phone down long enough to pay attention to her family. The intervention itself was almost comical in its execution. I'd brought homemade apple pie, Marcus's favorite since he was little, and we were just settling in after dinner when Rachel stood up and announced she had something important to discuss. "Diane," she said, clasping her hands together like she was about to deliver a prepared speech. "Marcus and I have been talking, and we're concerned about your relationship with technology." I blinked, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Your phone," Marcus chimed in, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mom, you're on it constantly. Even when we're talking, you're checking messages or typing something. It's like you're not really here with us." I felt my face flush. "I'm sorry if I've seemed distracted. Work has been particularly demanding lately." "That's exactly what we mean," Rachel said, warming to her theme. "You're retired, Diane. You shouldn't have work stress anymore. You should be enjoying this time of your life, maybe taking up gardening or joining a book club." "I'm not retired," I said carefully. "I still work full-time." Rachel and Marcus exchanged one of those looks, the kind that made me feel like I was a child who'd said something adorable but incorrect. "Mom," Marcus said gently, "checking emails and playing games on your phone isn't the same as having a job." The condescension in his voice hit me like a physical blow. I realized then that they had no idea what I actually did for a living. They'd constructed this entire narrative where I was a lonely widow who'd become too dependent on digital distractions, and nothing I said was going to change their minds. "So here's what we're going to do," Rachel announced, reaching across the table toward my purse. "We're going to help you break this habit. Just for tonight, we're going to put your phone away so you can focus on being present with us." I should have stopped her. I should have explained that my phone wasn't just a device for entertainment, that it was literally a lifeline to critical systems that couldn't afford to go unmonitored. But I was so stunned by their presumption that I just sat there as she pulled my phone from my purse, powered it down, and walked over to the kitchen drawer where she locked it away with a satisfied smile. "There," she said, returning to her seat. "Now we can have a real conversation." Marcus looked relieved, like they'd just solved a major problem. "Thanks, honey." "Mom, you'll see how much better this feels." I wanted to tell them they were making a mistake. I wanted to explain that I wasn't addicted to my phone, that I was actually working, that the device they'd just confiscated was my connection to responsibilities they couldn't even imagine. But looking at their faces, so pleased with themselves for staging this intervention, I realized they wouldn't believe me. Instead, I spent the next 2 hours making polite conversation, while internally calculating how many security alerts I was probably missing. We talked about Rachel's new workout routine, Marcus's upcoming presentation to the board, and their plans for redecorating the guest bathroom. Normal, family conversation that under any other circumstances I would have enjoyed. But every few minutes, I found myself unconsciously reaching for my phone, only to remember it was locked away. Each time, Rachel would give me this knowing smile, like she was witnessing my recovery from addiction in real time. "See how nice this is?" she said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "No distractions, just family time." I nodded and smiled, but inside I was growing more anxious by the minute. By the time I left their house that evening, I'd been offline for nearly 3 hours. In my line of work, that's an eternity. The moment I got home, I rushed to my home office and logged into the company systems from my computer. The alert queue was overflowing. 3 separate security incidents had required manual intervention, while I was sitting at dinner pretending to be grateful for their help with my phone addiction. I spent the next 4 hours cleaning up the mess, reconfiguring compromised systems, and updating security protocol. It was past midnight when I finally felt confident that everything was stable again. I was exhausted, frustrated, and more than a little angry at my family for putting me in this position. But what really bothered me wasn't the extra work or the late night. It was the realization that my own son and daughter-in-law saw me as such a stereotypical older person, that they couldn't imagine I might have real important work to do. They'd reduced me to a caricature of a technology-addicted grandmother, and they were so confident in their assessment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That they felt justified in taking my phone away like I was a misbehaving child. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. If they wanted to treat me like I was just a confused old woman playing with gadgets, then maybe it was time they learned exactly what this confused old woman was capable of. They'd simplified my life by taking away my phone, assuming I was too dependent on technology. Well, perhaps it was time I simplified theirs, by showing them just how dependent they were on the technology I controlled. I didn't plan to hurt them, not really. I just wanted them to understand that their assumptions about me were not only wrong but dangerously naive. They worked for a company whose entire digital infrastructure depended on systems I'd designed and maintained. They used security protocols I'd written, accessed networks I'd configured, and trusted in protections I'd implemented. They thought they were helping me by taking away my phone. What they didn't realize was that phone wasn't just my connection to the digital world, it was my control center for the very systems that made their professional lives possible. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to Marcus and Rachel's work routine. Marcus was a project manager in the software development division, responsible for coordinating teams and ensuring deliverables met deadlines. Rachel worked in marketing, managing social media campaigns and client communication. Both of them were completely dependent on the company's digital infrastructure to do their jobs. Marcus would come home every evening talking about his current project, a new client portal that was supposed to launch in 6 weeks. He was proud of his work and I could hear the excitement in his voice when he talked about the features they were implementing and the positive feedback they'd received from beta testers. Rachel, meanwhile, was working on a major campaign for one of our biggest clients. She'd been putting in long hours, staying late at the office to coordinate with different time zones and manage multiple moving parts. She'd mentioned checking her work email at all hours, much like I did, though she somehow failed to see the irony in that. Both of them were so focused on their own professional responsibilities that they never stopped to think about who maintained the systems that made their work possible. They used their company laptops and phones, accessed the network, sent emails, and stored files in the cloud without ever considering the infrastructure that supported it all. It would have been easy to cause immediate dramatic problems. I could have triggered system failures that would have shut down their projects overnight, but that wasn't the point. I didn't want to destroy their work or get them fired. I wanted them to understand what they'd dismissed so casually. Instead, I started small. I began implementing subtle changes to their user access levels, nothing that would prevent them from doing their jobs, but enough to create minor inconveniences. A slightly slower network connection here, a delayed email delivery there, small glitches in software they used daily. Marcus was the first to notice something was off. He called me on Tuesday evening, sounding frustrated. "Mom, I'm having the weirdest technical problems at work," he said. "My computer keeps freezing, and emails are taking forever to send. It's like the whole system is running in slow motion." I made sympathetic noises and suggested he contact IT support. "These things happen with computers," I said. "I'm sure they'll figure it out." "That's just it," he said. "I've submitted 3 tickets, and they keep telling me everything looks normal on their end, but I know something's wrong. It's affecting my whole team's productivity." Rachel was experiencing similar issues, though she was handling them with less patience than Marcus. She'd started staying even later at the office, trying to compensate for the delays and glitches that were making her work take twice as long as usual. "It's so frustrating," she complained to Marcus over dinner that Friday. "I've been working on this campaign for weeks, and now everything is falling apart because of technical problems. The client is getting impatient, and I can't explain why simple tasks are taking so long." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "I know exactly what you mean. It's like someone is deliberately sabotaging our systems." I found that comment particularly interesting. Marcus was closer to the truth than he realized, though he still hadn't made the connection between his mother's computer hobby and the sophisticated systems he used at work. By the end of the week, Both of them were stressed and exhausted from dealing with technical difficulties they couldn't understand or resolve. They'd both submitted multiple IT tickets, attended troubleshooting sessions, and even had their equipment replaced, but the problems persisted. The beauty of my approach was that the issues I was creating were subtle enough to avoid triggering major system alerts, but persistent enough to significantly impact their daily work. I was essentially giving them a taste of what it felt like to be dependent on technology that wasn't working properly, though they still didn't understand the lesson. That Sunday they invited me to dinner again, though this time the atmosphere was noticeably different. Instead of the confident, condescending tone they'd used the previous week, they both seemed frazzled and distracted. "I'm sorry if I seem out of it," Rachel said, as we sat down to eat. "Work has been absolutely insane this week. I'm starting to think our company's IT department is incompetent." "Join the club," Marcus said. "I've never experienced technical problems like this. It's like the whole system is cursed." I nodded sympathetically and asked if they thought it might be some kind of cyber attack. Both of them looked at me with surprise. "I don't think so," Marcus said. "I mean, that's not really something I know much about, but wouldn't IT have figured that out by now?" "You'd be surprised," I said carefully. "Cybersecurity is incredibly complex. Sometimes the most sophisticated attacks are designed to look like random technical problems." Rachel frowned. "How do you know about that stuff?" "Oh, I read articles online," I said vaguely. "It's fascinating how vulnerable computer systems can be." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I could see that my comment had planted a seed of doubt. They were both starting to realize that their technical problems might be more serious than they'd initially thought. After dinner, Marcus walked me to my car, and I could see he was troubled about something. "Mom," he said, "you mentioned cyber attacks early. Do you really think that's what's happening at work?" I shrugged. "I don't know, honey, but if it is, I hope your company has good security people protecting your systems." "I assume they do," he said, though he didn't sound entirely confident. "I mean, we're a tech company. We must have experts handling that stuff." "I'm sure you do," I agreed, though you might be surprised how many companies don't invest enough in cybersecurity until it's too late. That night, I decided to escalate things slightly. I implemented a few more noticeable glitches in their systems, nothing that would cause permanent damage, but enough to make their work lives significantly more difficult. Monday morning, Marcus called me in a panic. "Mom, something major is happening at work. Half our systems are down, and nobody knows why. They're saying it might be a security breach." I felt a small stab of guilt, but I pushed it aside. "That sounds serious. Are they bringing in outside experts to help?" "I don't know," he said. "They've got our IT team working around the clock, but they seem completely overwhelmed. My entire project is on hold until they can figure out what's going on." Rachel was in an even worse state. When I called to check on her that evening, she was nearly in tears. "Diane, I don't know what to do," she said. "My client is threatening to pull the campaign because we can't deliver what we promised. Everything keeps crashing, and I'm starting to think I'm going to lose my job over this." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered how she'd smiled when she locked my phone away, how she'd patronized me about my addiction to technology, how she'd assumed I was just a confused old woman who didn't understand the real world. "I'm sorry you're going through this. Is there anything I can do to help?" She laughed bitterly. "Unless you know anything about computer security, I don't think so." "Well," I said carefully, "I do know a little bit about that." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" "I've been working in cybersecurity for quite a while," I said. "If your company is having problems, I might be able to offer some insights." Rachel's tone shifted from desperation to skepticism. "Diane, no offense, but we're dealing with serious professional issues here. This isn't the kind of thing you can fix by Googling computer tips." And there it was again, that condescending tone that made my blood boil. Even in the middle of a crisis that was affecting her livelihood, she couldn't bring herself to consider that I might actually know what I was talking about. "You're probably right," I said mildly. "I'm sure your experts will figure it out." But after I hung up, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. They still didn't get it. Even with their professional lives crumbling around them, they couldn't imagine that the woman they'd treated like a technological incompetent might actually be the one person who could solve their problem. It was time to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. Tuesday morning arrived with an email that changed everything. I was sitting in my home office, monitoring the chaos I'd carefully orchestrated at TechFlow, when a message appeared in my inbox from someone I hadn't heard from in months. The sender was Dr. Sarah Chen, the Chief Technology Officer at Meridian Financial, one of our most important clients, and a company I'd personally helped secure against 3 major attack attempts over the past year. The subject line read, "Urgent Security Consultation Request," and the message itself was brief but alarming. Meridian was experiencing what they described as unprecedented system vulnerabilities that their internal team couldn't identify or resolve. They were requesting an emergency consultation with our top security specialist, and Dr. Chen had specifically asked for me by name. I stared at the email for several minutes, feeling a mixture of professional pride and personal conflict. Here was one of the most respected technology executives in the financial sector, someone who managed billions of dollars in digital assets, reaching out to me directly because she trusted my expertise. Meanwhile, my own family was convinced I was just an elderly woman with a smartphone addiction. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Marcus and Rachel were struggling with the minor technical difficulties I'd introduced to their work systems, a real crisis was developing at one of our major clients, and they needed the skills of the same woman who'd been patronized and dismissed just days earlier. I called Dr. Chen within the hour, and her relief was palpable when I identified myself. We'd worked together on several high-stakes projects, and she'd always treated me with the professional respect that my family seemed incapable of showing. "Diane, thank God you're available," she said without preamble. "We're looking at what appears to be a coordinated attack on our entire network infrastructure. My team is good, but they're out of their depth here. We need someone who understands advanced persistent threats and can think like the attackers." I spent the next 20 minutes listening to her describe symptoms that sounded far more serious than anything I'd been dealing with at TechFlow. This wasn't the work of a disgruntled family member teaching a lesson about assumptions and respect. This was a sophisticated, well-funded attack by professionals who understood exactly what they were doing. "I can be there this afternoon," I told her, "but I'll need full administrative access and the authority to implement emergency protocols without having to explain every decision to a committee." "Done," she said immediately. "Diane, I don't care if you have to shut down our entire network and rebuild it from scratch. Just stop these people before they access our client accounts." After ending the call, I sat in my office chair feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with high-stakes cybersecurity work. This was what I lived for. The challenge of matching wits with skilled adversaries who thought they could break systems I'd spent decades learning to protect. But first, I had some personal business to address. As I opened my laptop and began reversing the minor glitches I'd implemented in Marcus and Rachel's work systems. It had been an effective demonstration, but I couldn't let personal grievances interfere with a real emergency that could affect thousands of people. Within an hour, I'd restored their systems to full functionality. Marcus would probably assume the IT department had finally solved the mysterious technical problems, and Rachel would be relieved to get back to her campaign work. They'd never know how close they'd come to understanding the real scope of their mother's capabilities. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in Meridian Financial's executive conference room surrounded by their entire technology leadership team. Chan had introduced me simply as our security consultant, and I could see the surprise on several faces when they realized their emergency expert was a woman in her late 60s wearing a modest cardigan and sensible shoes. The lead network administrator, a man in his 30s with the confident bearing of someone who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve, looked particularly skeptical. "No offense," he said, "but are you sure you're the right person for this? We're dealing with some pretty advanced stuff here." Dr. Chen's expression darkened. "David, Ms. Walker has more experience with network security than everyone in this room combined. I suggest you listen to what she has to say." I smiled politely and opened my laptop. "Why don't you show me what you're seeing, and we'll go from there." For the next hour, David and his team walked me through the attack patterns they'd identified. It was impressive work by the attackers, I had to admit. They'd used a combination of social engineering, zero-day exploits, and what appeared to be inside knowledge of Meridian's network architecture to establish multiple access points throughout the system. But as I analyzed their approach, I began to recognize patterns that reminded me of attacks I'd seen before. The methodology was sophisticated, but it wasn't entirely original. These attackers were using techniques that had been documented in cybersecurity research papers, tools that had been demonstrated at security conferences, and vulnerabilities that had been discussed in professional forums. "They're good," I said finally, "but they're not as innovative as they think they are. This is a textbook advanced persistent threat, executed with skill but following predictable patterns." David frowned. "Predictable? We've been chasing these intrusions for 3 days and can't get ahead of them." I turned my laptop screen toward the group and pulled up a network diagram I'd been sketching while they talked. "They're using a hub-and-spoke model for their access points, which means they have a central command structure coordinating the different attack vectors. If we can identify and isolate that central node, we can collapse their entire operation." The room went quiet as everyone studied my diagram. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes bright with understanding. "You can see their network topology?" "Not exactly," I said, "but I can infer it from their behavior patterns. Every attack leaves fingerprints, and these attackers are using tools and techniques that require coordination. That coordination has to happen somewhere, and that somewhere is their weakness." I spent the next 4 hours implementing a counterattack strategy that involved creating what I called honeypot trails throughout Meridian's network. Essentially, I was giving the attackers exactly what they thought they wanted while secretly tracking their movements and mapping their command structure. It was delicate work that required constant monitoring and real-time adjustment. I found myself completely absorbed in the challenge, the same way I used to get lost in complex programming problems when I was younger. This was the kind of work that reminded me why I'd never wanted to retire, why I'd stayed in a field that most people my age had long since abandoned. By 8 o'clock that evening, I had them. The honeypot trails had led me directly to the attacker's command server, and I'd managed to isolate it without them realizing they'd been discovered. More importantly, I'd identified the source of their inside knowledge about Meridian's network. "You have a problem," I told Dr. Chen as we sat alone in her office, while her team implemented the security patches I'd recommended. "Someone with administrative access has been feeding information to these attackers." Her face went pale. "You're saying we have an insider threat?" "I'm saying someone with legitimate access to your most sensitive systems has been providing detailed intelligence to people who wanted to steal from you," I said. "The question is whether that person knew what they were doing or if they were manipulated into it." We spent another hour reviewing access logs and identifying the compromised account. It turned out to be a senior systems administrator who'd been with the company for 8 years, someone Dr. Chen trusted completely. The evidence suggested he'd been gradually sharing information over several months, probably without realizing the full scope of what he was enabling. "Social engineering," I explained. "They probably approached him through professional networking sites, maybe posed as security researchers or potential employers. They built a relationship with him over time, gradually asking for more detailed information about Meridian systems under the guise of technical discussions or job interviews." Dr. Chen rubbed her temples, looking exhausted. "So what do we do now?" "Now we clean up the mess." I'll need another day to make sure we've closed all their access points and secured your systems against similar attacks. Then you'll need to have some difficult conversations with your staff about information security and social engineering awareness." As I packed up my laptop that night, David approached me with a sheepish expression. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I shouldn't have questioned your qualifications when you walked in here." I smiled. "It's fine. I'm used to people making assumptions based on appearance. The important thing is that we stopped the attack before any real damage was done." "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" he asked. "Longer than you've been alive, probably." I started in cybersecurity back when we had to worry about phone phreakers and bulletin board systems. The technology has changed, but the principles are still the same." He shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen anyone work like that. You made it look easy." "It's not easy. It's just experience. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you start to see patterns that aren't obvious to younger analysts." Driving home that night, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with my family situation and everything to do with professional accomplishment. I'd spent the day using skills I'd developed over decades to solve a problem that had stumped an entire team of talented technologists. I'd been challenged, respected, and valued for my expertise. It was a stark contrast to how I'd been treated at Sunday dinner just days early. At Meridian, my age and appearance hadn't mattered. What mattered was my ability to understand complex systems, think strategically about security threats, and implement solutions under pressure. Chen and her team had trusted me with their most critical digital assets because they knew I could protect them. The next morning, I returned to Meridian to complete the security assessment and help them implement long-term protections against future attacks. Word had apparently spread through the company about the previous day's success, because I found myself being introduced to executives and department heads as the security expert who saved our network. Each introduction was a small vindication. These were successful, educated professionals who recognized expertise when they saw it, regardless of whether it came packaged in the form they might have expected. They asked intelligent questions about cybersecurity best practices, listened carefully to my recommendations, and treated me as the subject matter expert I'd worked decades to become. By contrast, I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus and Rachel's assumption that my work with computers was just a hobby, something I did to pass the time, because I didn't have anything more meaningful to occupy my attention. They'd reduced my entire professional identity to the stereotype of an elderly person who'd gotten too attached to digital devices. During my lunch break at Meridian, I decided to call Marcus to see how his mysterious technical problems were progressing. I was curious to see if he'd noticed that everything had suddenly started working properly again. "Mom, it's the strangest thing," he said when I asked about work. "Yesterday morning everything was still completely broken, and then suddenly around noon everything started working perfectly again. It's like someone just flipped a switch." "That's wonderful," I said. "Did the IT department figure out what was wrong?" "They're claiming credit for fixing it, but honestly I don't think they had any idea what they were doing. They kept talking about running diagnostics and updating drivers, but none of that explains why everything just suddenly started working again." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while privately marveling at how close he was to the truth without realizing. Someone had indeed flipped a switch, but it wasn't anyone on his IT team. "Maybe it was just one of those mysterious computer things," I suggested. "Maybe," he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "The whole experience has made me realize how dependent we are on these systems working properly. When they went down, it felt like my entire job was at risk." That comment gave me pause. Marcus was starting to understand something important about the relationship between technology and professional security, even if he didn't realize the broader implications yet. "Technology can be fragile," I agreed. "It's good that you have people who understand how to protect your system." "I guess," he said, "though after this week I'm not sure I trust our IT department as much as I used to. If they couldn't explain what was wrong or how they fixed it, how do I know it won't happen again?" It was a fair question, and one that suggested Marcus was beginning to think more critically about cybersecurity issues. Maybe the experience had been educational for him in ways I hadn't intended. Rachel's perspective was similar when I spoke with her later that day. Her relief at having her systems working again was obvious, but she was also clearly shaken by how vulnerable she'd felt when technology she depended on had stopped functioning properly. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," she said, "about cyber attacks and security breaches. Do you really think that's what happened to us?" "It's possible," I said carefully. "Technical problems can have many different causes. The important thing is that everything is working now." "But what if it happens again?" she asked. "I can't go through another week like that. It nearly destroyed the campaign I've been working on for months." I could hear the stress in her voice and I felt another pang of guilt about the anxiety I'd caused. My intention had been to teach them a lesson about assumptions and respect, but I was starting to realize that the experience had genuinely frightened them. Companies usually learn from these kinds of incidents. They invest in better security measures and train their staff to recognize potential threats. "I hope so," she said, "because I never want to feel that helpless again." That afternoon, I finished my work at Meridian and submitted a comprehensive report to Dr. Chen outlining my findings and recommendations. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but I'd identified several areas where their security posture could be strengthened to prevent similar attacks in the future. "This is exactly what we needed," Dr. Chen said as she reviewed my report. "I'm going to recommend that our board approve a long-term consulting contract with you. We need someone with your expertise available for ongoing security assessment and incident response." The offer was tempting, both professionally and financially. Meridian was exactly the kind of client I enjoyed working with: technically sophisticated, security conscious, and willing to invest in proper protection for their digital assets. But accepting the contract would mean revealing more about my professional activities to my family. If I was going to be traveling regularly for high-profile consulting work, it would be difficult to maintain the fiction that I was just a retiree with a smartphone hobby. "Let me think about it," I told Dr. Chen. "I appreciate the offer, but I have some personal considerations to work through." She nodded understandingly. "Of course, but Diane, I hope you know how valuable your expertise is. There aren't many people who could have done what you did for us this week." Driving home that evening, I found myself at a crossroad. The success at Meridian had reminded me how much I valued my professional identity and how good it felt to be recognized for my expertise, but it had also highlighted the disconnect between how I was perceived in my professional life versus how my own family saw me. I could continue letting Marcus and Rachel believe I was just an elderly woman with a technology addiction, maintaining the peace, but sacrificing my own sense of professional dignity. Or I could find a way to show them who I really was, risking their discomfort but claiming the respect I'd earned through decades of specialized work. The decision became clearer when I checked my email that evening and found a message from Mark. The subject line read, "Thank you," and I opened it with curiosity. "Mom," he'd written, "I wanted to thank you for listening to me complain about work problems this week. I know I've been stressed and probably not the best company lately. The technical issues we've been having really showed me how much I depend on systems I don't understand, and it made me appreciate the people who do understand them. I hope whoever fixed our problems knows how grateful we are." I read the message 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotion. Marcus was expressing genuine gratitude for technical expertise, even though he had no idea he was describing work I'd done. He was beginning to understand the value of cybersecurity knowledge, even as he remained completely unaware that his mother possessed exactly that knowledge. Rachel had sent a similar message, thanking me for my support during what she called the worst week of my professional life. She'd written about feeling helpless when technology she depended on had failed, and how much she'd learned to appreciate the invisible work that kept digital systems functioning. Both messages were sincere and thoughtful, but they also highlighted how completely they'd compartmentalized their understanding of technology expertise. They could recognize and value cybersecurity skills in the abstract, but they couldn't imagine that someone they knew personally might possess those skills. That night, I made a decision. I was going to accept Dr. Chen's consulting offer, and I was going to tell my family the truth about my work, not to hurt them or prove them wrong, but because I'd realized that hiding my professional identity was doing a disservice to all of us. Marcus and Rachel deserved to know who I really was, not because they needed to be impressed or intimidated, but because authentic relationships require honesty. They'd been making assumptions about me based on incomplete information, and I'd been enabling those assumptions by not correcting them. More importantly, I'd realized that I deserved to be known and appreciated for who I actually was, not for the simplified version of myself that was easier for others to understand. I'd spent too many years allowing my family to see only the grandmother and mother parts of my identity while keeping my professional accomplishments hidden. The question now was how to reveal the truth in a way that would bring us closer together rather than driving us further apart. I needed to show them my real capabilities without making them feel foolish for not recognizing them earlier. As I prepared for bed that night, I started planning how I would tell them about Meridian, about my real work, and about the skills they'd dismissed as a technology addiction. It was time for Diane Walker, the cybersecurity expert, to meet Diane Walker, the grandmother, and I hoped my family would be ready to get to know the complete person I'd always been. The opportunity to reveal my true identity came sooner than I'd expected. Friday afternoon, while I was reviewing Dr. Chen's consulting contract in my home office, my phone rang with an unknown number. The caller identified herself as Jennifer Walsh from TechFlow's Human Resources Department, and her voice carried the kind of forced professionalism that usually meant trouble. "Ms. Walker, I'm calling regarding some unusual network activity that occurred this week," she said. "Our security audit has flagged several administrative actions that were performed under your credentials, and we need to schedule a meeting to discuss these findings." My heart sank. In my focus on helping Meridian Financial, I'd been careless about covering my tracks when I'd manipulated Marcus and Rachel's work system. Someone in TechFlow's IT department had apparently noticed the unauthorized access, and now I was facing exactly the kind of professional scrutiny I'd hoped to avoid. "I see," I said carefully. "What kind of meeting are we talking about?" "A formal security review," Jennifer replied. "Company policy requires us to investigate any potential misuse of administrative privileges. I've scheduled it for Monday morning at 9 o'clock. You'll need to bring any devices you use for company access, and there will be representatives from IT security present." After ending the call, I sat in my office feeling a familiar mixture of anxiety and resolve. I'd been in similar situations before, moments when careful explanations and documentation were the only things standing between me and serious professional consequence. The difference this time was that my personal relationships were intertwined with my professional decisions in ways that would make the situation far more complicated to navigate. I spent the weekend preparing for Monday's meeting. I gathered logs showing exactly what actions I'd taken and when, documented the specific changes I'd made to Marcus and Rachel's user accounts, and prepared a detailed explanation of my rationale for each decision. It wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but I had decades of experience handling difficult professional situations. What I hadn't anticipated was that Marcus would be part of the review process. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to TechFlow's corporate headquarters. I'd been to the building many times over the years, but always for routine consultations or system updates. Walking into a formal disciplinary meeting felt entirely different, especially knowing that I was about to confront the intersection of my professional and personal lives in the most uncomfortable way possible. Jennifer Walsh met me in the lobby with the kind of polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the efficient manner of someone who'd handled many uncomfortable conversations. As we rode the elevator to the 14th floor, she made small talk about the weather while I mentally rehearsed the explanation I'd been preparing all weekend. The conference room was set up like an interrogation, with a long table surrounded by chairs and a laptop connected to a large display screen. Jennifer introduced me to Mike Rodriguez from IT Security, a serious man in his 40s, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and then, to my surprise, Marcus walked in, carrying a tablet and looking confused. "Mom," he said, stopping short when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" Jennifer looked between us with obvious interest. "You two know each other?" "She's my mother," Marcus said, still staring at me in bewilderment. "But I don't understand why she's at a security meeting." "Your mother is Diane Walker, our cybersecurity consultant," Mike explained, consulting his notes. "She's here because we detected unauthorized access to employee accounts under her credentials." Marcus blinked several times, processing this information. "My mother is a cybersecurity consultant." The awkwardness in the room was palpable. Jennifer cleared her throat and gestured for everyone to sit down. "Perhaps we should start with some clarification about relationships and roles here." I took a deep breath and looked directly at Marcus. "Yes, I work for TechFlow. I have for the past 15 years. I'm the senior security architect who designed most of the systems you use every day." Marcus's mouth fell open. "You're the security architect? But you never said anything about working here. You never asked what I did for a living." I replied, "When you got hired 3 years ago, I assumed you'd figure it out eventually. When you didn't, I decided to let you make your own way without interference from your mother." Mike Rodriguez was watching this family revelation with obvious discomfort. "This is highly irregular," he said. "Company policy prohibits family members from having access to each other's work accounts, which is exactly why I didn't interfere with Marcus's work," I said. "Until this week, I never accessed his account or made any changes that would affect his job performance." Jennifer leaned forward. But you did access his account this week? Yes, I admitted. And his wife's account as well. I made temporary modifications to their system performance as part of a personal disagreement we were having. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was staring at me like I'd just revealed I was an alien, while Mike and Jennifer exchanged glances that suggested this situation was beyond their normal protocols. You sabotaged our computer systems because of a personal disagreement? Marcus asked, his voice rising. Mom, do you have any idea how stressful this week has been? Rachel thought she was going to lose her job. I felt a stab of guilt, but I also felt a flare of anger at his tone. I made minor temporary adjustments to demonstrate a point about assumptions and respect. Nothing I did caused permanent damage or put anyone's job at risk. What kind of point? He demanded. What assumptions? The assumption that I'm just a confused old woman who doesn't understand technology. The assumption that when I check my phone during dinner, I'm playing games instead of preventing cyber attacks that could affect thousands of people. The assumption that you and Rachel could take my phone away like I was a misbehaving child who needed to be taught a lesson about the real world. Marcus's face went through several expressions as he processed this information. You're saying the technical problems we had this week were because we took your phone at dinner. I'm saying the technical problems you had this week were a demonstration of how dependent you are on systems you don't understand, maintained by people you don't respect, I replied. Mike Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout this exchange, and now he looked up with a frown. Walker, regardless of your personal motivations, using company resources to settle family disputes is a serious violation of our security policies. You're absolutely right, I said. I made a poor decision based on personal frustration, and I take full responsibility for that. I'm prepared to accept whatever disciplinary action you deem appropriate. Jennifer consulted her laptop. The unauthorized access occurred over a 3-day period and involved modifications to network performance settings, email delivery delays, and application response times. Is that correct? Yes, I confirmed. I can provide detailed logs showing exactly what changes were made and when they were reversed. They were reversed? Marcus asked. When? Tuesday afternoon, I said. When I realized I had a real emergency to deal with at Meridian Financial, I restored your systems to full functionality. Marcus frowned. Meridian Financial? But that's one of our biggest clients. They experienced a serious security breach this week, I explained. Chen called me directly to help resolve it. I spent 2 days implementing countermeasures and identifying the source of the attack. Mike Rodriguez looked up from his notes with new interest. You're the consultant who handled the Meridian incident? We heard about that through client service. Apparently, you prevented a major data theft. I did my job, I said simply. The atmosphere in the room began to shift as Mike and Jennifer realized they were dealing with someone whose professional reputation extended beyond tech flow. Marcus, meanwhile, was looking increasingly overwhelmed by the revelations about his mother's career. I don't understand, he said. If you're this important cybersecurity expert, why didn't you ever tell me? Why let me think you just worked with computers as a hobby? Because I wanted you to succeed on your own merits, I said. When you got hired here, I specifically requested that my relationship to you not be disclosed to your managers. I didn't want anyone to think you'd gotten your job because of family connection. But you let me complain about technical problems when you were the one causing them, he said accusingly. Yes, I admitted. And that was wrong. I let personal hurt override professional judgment, and I'm sorry for that. Jennifer had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Miss Carson, you mentioned that your wife was also affected by these system modifications. Is she aware of this meeting? Marcus shook his head. Rachel doesn't even know my mother works here. She thinks Mom is just someone who spends too much time on her phone. Perhaps she should be informed, Jennifer suggested. This situation affects her as well. The idea of Rachel learning about my professional identity in a formal disciplinary setting made my stomach clench. I'd wanted to tell my family the truth, but not like this. not in a conference room with HR representatives taking notes about my policy violations. Could we arrange a separate conversation with Rachel? I asked. This is already complicated enough without adding more family dynamics to an official company meeting. Mike Rodriguez was reviewing something on his laptop. Actually, there might be a bigger issue here, he said. If Walker has been concealing her family relationships while maintaining access to employee accounts, we may need to conduct a broader audit of her activities. I haven't concealed anything, I said, firming. My relationship to Marcus is documented in my personnel file. I simply requested that it not be widely publicized, and I've maintained strict professional boundaries regarding his work. Until this week, Mike pointed out. Until this week, I agreed. Jennifer looked at Marcus. Mr. Carson, how would you like to proceed? You have the right to file a formal complaint about the unauthorized access to your account. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the table while he processed everything he'd learned. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. I need to talk to my wife, he said, and I need to understand why my mother felt like she couldn't tell me who she really was. That's understandable, Jennifer said. We'll adjourn this meeting, pending further discussion with all affected parties. As we filed out of the conference room, Marcus lingered behind with me. The hallway was empty except for us, and I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. Mom, I don't know what to think right now, he said. I feel like I don't know you at all. You know me, I said. You just didn't know about this part of my life. But this isn't just a part of your life, he said. This is your whole career. This is what you do every day. And you let me think you were just some lonely widow who didn't have anything important to occupy her time. The pain in his voice caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on my own hurt feelings about being dismissed and underestimated, that I hadn't considered how my secrecy might have affected his understanding of our relationship. I never meant for you to think I was lonely or unfulfilled. I just didn't want to interfere with your career by having everyone know you were my son. But don't you see how that made me feel? He asked. I thought I was succeeding on my own, but now I find out my mother has been working here the whole time, probably watching everything I do. How do I know my achievements are real? It was a fair question, and one I should have anticipated. By hiding my professional identity, I'd protected Marcus from any appearance of nepotism, but I'd also deprived him of the knowledge he needed to properly evaluate his own accomplishments. Your achievements are real, I said. I've had no influence over your assignments, your performance reviews, or your career advancement. If anything, I've been more careful about maintaining professional distance than I would with any other employee. But you had access to my work account, he pointed out. You could have been monitoring my emails, my project files, everything. I could have, but I didn't, I said. Not until this week, and then only to make minor system adjustments that wouldn't affect your actual work. Marcus rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. I need time to process this, and I need to figure out how to tell Rachel that the woman she thinks is addicted to technology is actually one of the most important people at her company. Maybe I should tell her myself, I suggest. No, he said quickly. Let me handle it. But Mom, this can't happen again. Whatever issues we have as a family, you can't use your work access to make your point. That's not fair to anyone. You're absolutely right, I said. It won't happen again. As Marcus walked away toward the elevator, I felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. The truth was finally out, at least partially, but the consequences were still unfolding. I'd wanted my family to understand and respect my professional capabilities, but I'd achieved that goal in the worst possible way. That afternoon, I received a call from Dr. Chen at Meridian Financial. She'd heard through professional networks about some kind of security investigation at TechFlow and wanted to make sure it wouldn't affect our consulting arrangement. Diane, I hope everything is all right. I'd hate to think that our project caused problems for you at your primary employer. It's a personal matter that intersected with professional responsibilities, I explained. Nothing that affects my ability to work with Meridian, but I may need to be more transparent about my consulting activities going forward. Well, whatever the situation is, I want you to know that our board approved the long-term consulting contract, she said. We're prepared to offer you a very competitive arrangement for ongoing security services. The timing of her call was both fortunate and ironic. Here was a major client offering me expanded professional opportunities, while at the same time my primary employer was questioning my judgment and my family was struggling to understand who I really was. I'm very interested, I told Dr. Chen, but I may need a few days to resolve some conflicts of interest issues. Of course, she said. Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready. That evening, I sat in my home office staring at the consulting contract and thinking about the choices ahead of me. I could continue working for TechFlow, accepting whatever disciplinary action they imposed and trying to rebuild trust with my family, or I could take the Meridian contract and step away from the complications that came with working for the same company as my son. The decision became clearer when Marcus called me around 8 o'clock. His voice was tired but calmer than it had been earlier. I told Rachel, he said without preamble, about your real job, about what happened this week, about everything. How did she take it? I asked. She didn't believe me at first, he said. She kept insisting that you couldn't possibly be a cybersecurity expert because you don't fit her image of what that kind of person looks like. And now she's embarrassed, he said. She realized that every time she made a comment about your phone addiction or your lack of understanding about the real world, she was basically insulting one of the most qualified technology professionals she'll ever meet. I felt a small surge of vindication, followed immediately by regret. I hadn't wanted to embarrass Rachel or make her feel foolish. I just wanted her to see me as a complete person rather than a stereotype. Is she angry? I asked. She's confused, Marcus said, and hurt that you didn't trust her enough to tell her the truth. She said she wishes she'd known because she would have loved to talk to you about her work projects. Apparently, she's had questions about digital marketing security that she could have asked you instead of struggling with on her own. That revelation surprised me. I'd assumed Rachel was dismissive of technical expertise in general, but it sounded like she'd actually been interested in learning more about cybersecurity issues related to her own work. Maybe we can have those conversations now, I said. Maybe, Marcus said. But Mom, we need to talk about boundaries. Rachel and I discussed it, and we think it would be better if you worked somewhere else. Not because we don't respect what you do, but because it's too complicated having you monitor systems we depend on for our job. The suggestion didn't surprise me, and I realized I'd been coming to the same conclusion myself. The situation at TechFlow had become untenable the moment I'd compromised my professional ethics for personal reasons. Actually, I've been offered a consulting position with Meridian Financial, I said. It would mean leaving TechFlow, but it might be the best solution for everyone. You'd really leave? Marcus asked, and I heard something like concern in his voice. I'd consider it. It would give you and Rachel the space to build your careers without worrying about family complications, and it would give me the opportunity to work with clients who value my expertise. But what about your history with TechFlow? You've been there for 15 years. 15 years is a good run, I said, but maybe it's time for a change. We talked for another hour, working through the practical and emotional implications of my potential departure from TechFlow. Marcus seemed relieved by the prospect of not having to navigate the complex dynamics of working for the same company as his mother, but he also expressed genuine regret about the way our family had failed to communicate about something so fundamental to my identity. I keep thinking about all the times I complained about computer problems, or made jokes about technology, he said. You must have thought I was an idiot. I thought you were my son who was trying to make his own way in the world, I said. And I was proud of you for that, even when you didn't understand what I did for a living. But you should have told us, he said. We should have known who you really are. Yes, I agreed. I should have told you, and I should have told you years ago. I thought I was protecting your independence, but I was really just protecting myself from having to explain why my work was important to me. The next morning, I called Jennifer Walsh and requested a meeting to discuss my resignation from TechFlow. She seemed surprised but not entirely displeased by my decision. Given the circumstances, it's probably the most professional way to resolve the situation, she said. We'll need to conduct an exit interview, and ensure proper transfer of your security responsibilities, but I think we can make this transition work for everyone. I spent the rest of the week documenting my work, transferring system access codes to other team members, and preparing detailed notes for whoever would take over my responsibility. It was emotional work saying goodbye to systems I'd built and maintained for 15 years, but it also felt like the right decision. Friday afternoon, Dr. Chen called to confirm the details of my consulting arrangement with Meridian. The contract offered me more flexibility, better compensation, and the opportunity to work with cutting-edge security challenges, without the complications of family relationships. "I'm excited to have you on board," she said. "When can you start?" "Monday," I said. "I'm ready for a fresh start." That weekend, Marcus and Rachel invited me to dinner, the first time we'd all been together since the truth had come out. The atmosphere was different from our previous family meals, less casual but more honest. Rachel apologized for her comments about my phone usage, and her assumptions about my technical knowledge. "I feel terrible about the things I said," she admitted. "I had no idea I was being so dismissive of your actual career." "You didn't know," I said, "and I should have corrected your assumptions instead of letting them continue." Marcus raised his wine glass in a toast. "To fresh starts," he said, "and to actually getting to know each other as the people we really are." "To family members who are more complicated than they appear," Rachel added with a smile. As we clinked glasses, I felt a sense of resolution that had been missing from our relationship for years. The truth had been messy and painful to reveal, but it had also cleared the air in ways that I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I felt like my family was seeing the complete person I'd always been, rather than just the parts of me that fit their expectations. The road ahead would still have challenges, but at least we'd be traveling it with honesty about who we were and what we each brought to the relationship. And that, I thought, was worth all the complicated conversations and professional disruptions we'd had to navigate to get here. The call came at 6 in the morning on my third day at Meridian Financial. I was barely awake when my personal phone started ringing, displaying Marcus's name on the screen. In the past, early morning calls from family usually meant emergencies, so I answered immediately despite my grogginess. "Mom, you need to get to TechFlow right away," Marcus said without preamble. His voice carried a level of panic I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. "Something catastrophic has happened to their entire network." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of catastrophic?" "Everything is down," he said. "Email, file servers, the client portal, even the internal messaging system. They're saying it's the worst security breach in the company's history. The executives are in full crisis mode." My first instinct was professional concern for the systems I'd helped build and maintain for 15 years. My second instinct was to wonder why Marcus was calling me about a problem at my former employer. "Marcus, I don't work there anymore," I reminded him. "Whatever's happening at TechFlow is someone else's responsibility now." "That's just it," he said. "They can't figure out what's wrong. The current IT team is completely overwhelmed, and management is starting to panic about client data and financial liability. They're talking about bringing in outside consultants, but that could take days to arrange." I climbed out of bed and walked to my home office, already mentally cataloging the potential vulnerabilities in TechFlow's network architecture. "Have they identified the attack vector?" "I don't think they've identified anything," Marcus said. "The new security guy, Steve Patterson, keeps talking about sophisticated nation-state actors and advanced persistent threats, but I get the feeling he's just throwing around buzzwords because he's in over his head." Steve Patterson was the consultant TechFlow had hired to replace me. I'd met him briefly during the transition, and while he had impressive credentials on paper, I'd been concerned about his lack of hands-on experience with the specific systems that made TechFlow's network unique. "What about Mike Rodriguez?" I asked. "He's been there longer and knows the infrastructure better." "Mike called in sick yesterday," Marcus said. "Perfect timing, right?" "Look, Mom, I know this is awkward given everything that happened, but people are starting to ask if there's any way to get you back here temporarily, just until they can stabilize the situation." The request put me in an impossible position. Part of me wanted to help, both out of professional pride and genuine concern for the systems I'd spent years perfecting. But returning to TechFlow, even temporarily, would undermine the clean break I'd made and potentially create new complications with my Meridian contract. "Who's asking?" I said. "Management or just desperate employees?" "Both," Marcus admitted. "I heard Jennifer Walsh on a call with the CEO this morning, saying they needed to explore all options for bringing in expert help. Your name came up specifically." I was quiet for a moment, weighing the implication. A major security breach at TechFlow would affect thousands of employees and potentially compromise sensitive data for dozens of clients. Even though I no longer worked there, I felt a responsibility for systems I'd helped create. "I'll call Chen and see if Meridian can spare me for a day or two," I said finally. "But I'm not making any commitments beyond an initial assessment." "Thank you," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "I know this is complicated, but people are really scared about what this might mean for their job." After ending the call, I immediately contacted Dr. Chen to explain the situation. Her response was exactly what I'd hoped for: professional understanding mixed with strategic thinking. "Obviously, we want to maintain good relationships with other companies in our sector," she said. "If you can help TechFlow resolve their crisis quickly, it benefits everyone. Just make sure they understand you're there as a Meridian consultant, not as a former employee." An hour later, I was walking into TechFlow's headquarters for the first time since my resignation. The atmosphere in the building was noticeably different from my previous visits. Instead of the usual calm efficiency, there was an undercurrent of anxiety that I could feel even in the elevator. Jennifer Walsh met me in the lobby, looking harried and grateful in equal measure. "Diane, thank you for coming. I know the circumstances of your departure were complicated, but we really need your expertise right now." She led me up to the executive conference room, where I found what looked like a war room operation. Laptops were scattered across the long table, cables snaked between devices, and several people I didn't recognize were huddled around monitors displaying network diagnostics and error logs. Steve Patterson was standing at the front of the room, pointing at a whiteboard covered with network diagrams and technical notes. He was a tall, thin man in his early 40s who projected confidence despite the chaos around him. When Jennifer introduced me, he looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Miss Walker," he said, extending his hand with obvious reluctance. "I've heard a lot about your work here. I appreciate you coming in to consult on this situation." The word consult was emphasized in a way that made it clear he saw me as a temporary visitor, rather than someone with deeper knowledge of the systems under attack. I decided to let his attitude speak for itself and focus on understanding the scope of the problem. "What can you tell me about the attack timeline?" I asked, settling into a chair and opening my laptop. Steve launched into a detailed presentation about sophisticated malware, coordinated intrusion attempts, and what he described as military-grade encryption algorithms being used to lock TechFlow out of their own system. His explanation was technically sound but generic, the kind of analysis that could apply to dozens of different attack scenarios. After 20 minutes of listening to his assessment, I asked to see the actual system logs and network traffic data. Steve hesitated, clearly reluctant to share information that might reveal gaps in his analysis. "I'm not sure that's necessary," he said. "We've already conducted a thorough forensic review, and I'm confident in our assessment of the threat level." Jennifer intervened before I could respond. "Steve, Ms. Walker designed most of these systems. If she can identify something we're missing, we need to know about it." Reluctantly, Steve granted me access to the monitoring systems I'd used for years. It took less than 10 minutes of reviewing the data for me to identify several issues with his analysis. The attack patterns he'd attributed to sophisticated nation-state actors looked more like the work of opportunistic criminals using readily available tools. More concerning, some of the security breaches he'd identified appeared to be the result of system failures caused by recent configuration changes. Someone had modified critical security protocols without fully understanding their interdependencies, creating vulnerabilities that clever attackers had been quick to exploit. "When were these configuration changes made?" I asked, pointing to specific entries in the system log. Steve glanced at his notes. "Those were implemented last week, as part of our security enhancement initiative. We updated several legacy protocols to current industry standards. I felt a cold realization wash over me. The legacy protocols he'd updated were specialized security measures I'd designed specifically for TechFlow's unique network architecture. They weren't outdated. They were customized solutions that standard industry protocols couldn't replace without careful adaptation. Did anyone review the potential impact of these changes before implementation? I asked. Of course, Steve said defensively. We followed standard change management procedures and tested everything in our development environment. Your development environment doesn't replicate the full production network architecture, I pointed out. Some of these protocols only function properly when integrated with other systems that aren't present in the test environment. The room went quiet, as people began to understand the implications of what I was saying. Steve's face flushed red, as he realized his security enhancements had actually created the vulnerabilities that attackers were now exploiting. Are you suggesting this breach is the result of our own security updates? Jennifer asked carefully. I'm suggesting that well-intentioned changes to complex systems can have unintended consequences, I said diplomatically. The good news is that if we understand how these vulnerabilities were created, we can reverse them relatively quickly. Steve crossed his arms defensively. Even if there were issues with the configuration changes, that doesn't explain the sophisticated attack methods we're seeing. I turned my laptop screen toward the group and pulled up a detailed analysis of the attack patterns. Actually, it explains everything. These aren't sophisticated attacks. They're opportunistic exploitation of known vulnerability. The attackers are using automated tools to scan for common security gaps, and they found several that were inadvertently created by the recent configuration changes. For the next hour, I walked the team through a detailed reconstruction of how the attack had unfolded. It was a classic case of cascading failures, where small configuration errors had combined to create larger vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit with relatively simple methods. The solution was complex but achievable. We needed to restore the original security protocols while carefully implementing the legitimate improvements that Steve's team had been trying to make. It would require several hours of careful work, but it was far from the catastrophic situation that everyone had feared. How long will this take to fix? Jennifer asked. If I can work without interruption, probably 6 to 8 hours, I said, but it requires someone who understands the original system architecture and can modify the current configuration without breaking other interdependencies. Steve looked like he was about to protest, but Jennifer cut him off. Whatever you need, she said. We'll clear the conference room and give you full access to anything you require. As the team dispersed to give me space to work, Steve lingered behind with obvious reluctance. Walker, I want you to know that the configuration changes were made with the best of intentions. We were trying to improve security, not compromise it. I understand, I said. System administration is complex work, and it's easy to overlook interactions between different components. The important thing now is fixing the problems and learning from the experience. He nodded gratefully, and I could see some of the defensive tension leave his posture. Is there anything I can do to help? Actually, yes. I'll need someone to monitor network traffic while I make changes, and you're familiar with the current monitoring tools. If you're willing to assist, it would be helpful to have a second set of eyes on the process. The offer to collaborate seemed to restore some of Steve's confidence, and we settled into what turned out to be an effective working partnership. He was knowledgeable and dedicated, even if he'd been in over his head with TechFlow's unique security requirements. As we worked through the afternoon, gradually restoring functionality to different parts of the network, I found myself appreciating the complexity of the systems I'd helped build over the years. It was satisfying work, like solving an intricate puzzle where each piece had to fit perfectly with dozens of others. Around 4 o'clock, Marcus appeared in the conference room doorway, looking anxious. How's it going? He asked. Better than expected, I said. We should have most systems back online within the next couple of hours. That's incredible, he said. People were starting to talk about this taking weeks to resolve. Steve looked up from his monitoring station. Your mother has an impressive understanding of these systems. I've learned more about network security architecture in the past few hours than I did in the previous 6 months. The comment seemed to surprise Marcus, who was still adjusting to the idea of his mother as a respected technical expert. "She's always been good with computers," he said awkwardly. "This goes well beyond being good with computers," Steve said. "This is master-level systems engineering." TechFlow was lucky to have someone with her expertise designing their infrastructure. I felt a warm glow of professional satisfaction, but more importantly, I could see that Marcus was beginning to understand the scope and complexity of the work I'd been doing all these years. It wasn't just a job or a hobby, it was specialized expertise that had real value and impact. By 6 o'clock we'd restored full functionality to TechFlow's network and implemented additional security measures to prevent similar attacks in the future. Steve had proven to be a quick learner, and I was confident he could maintain the systems effectively with a better understanding of their original design principles. Jennifer returned to the conference room, just as we were finishing the final verification tests. "Everything's working again. Everything's working better than before," I said. "We've closed the vulnerabilities that allowed the attack and strengthened several other potential weak points." "How can we thank you?" she asked. "This could have been a disaster for our client relationships and company reputation." "Just make sure Steve has the resources he needs to maintain these systems properly," I said, "and maybe consider more thorough testing procedures before implementing major configuration changes." As I packed up my laptop and prepared to leave, Steve approached me with what looked like a carefully prepared speech. "Ms. Walker, I owe you an apology. When I took this position, I assumed I could improve upon legacy systems without fully understanding their original design rationale. Today taught me how much I still have to learn. We all make assumptions based on incomplete information," I said. "The important thing is being willing to learn when new information becomes available." Marcus walked me to the parking garage, and I could sense he had something on his mind. When we reached my car, he stopped and turned to face me. "Mom, I need to apologize," he said, "not just for the phone thing, but for years of not understanding what you do for a living. Watching you work today, seeing how Steve and the other technical people talked about your expertise, I realized I've been completely clueless about who you are professionally." "You don't need to apologize for not understanding technical work," I said. "That's not your field." "But I should have been curious enough to ask real questions," he said. "Instead, I just assumed you were someone who played around with computers because you didn't have anything better to do." That was ignorant and disrespectful. It was the kind of acknowledgement I'd wanted for years, but hearing it now felt more like relief than vindication. "The important thing is that we understand each other better now. Rachel wants to have dinner this weekend," he said. "She's been reading about cybersecurity since everything came out, and she has about 100 questions about digital marketing security that she wants to ask you." The idea of Rachel actively seeking my professional advice was both surprising and gratifying. I'd be happy to talk with her about that. Marketing security is actually a specialized area that a lot of people don't understand well. "And Mom," Marcus said, as I got into my car, "thank you for coming back to help today. I know it was complicated for you, but it meant a lot to people here. They were really scared about losing their jobs." Driving home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my professional and personal circumstances had changed over the past few weeks. The crisis at TechFlow had provided an unexpected opportunity to demonstrate my expertise in a context where my family could see and appreciate it. More importantly, it had shown that my years of work had real value that extended beyond my own career satisfaction. The next morning, Dr. Chen called to check on how the TechFlow consultation had gone. I gave her a detailed briefing on the technical issues and their resolution, and she listened with the kind of engaged interest that reminded me why I enjoyed working with her. "It sounds like you handled a complex situation very professionally," she said, "and I imagine it was satisfying to solve problems in systems you'd originally designed." It was, I admitted, but it also reinforced my decision to move on to new challenges. TechFlow will be fine with Steve managing their security, especially now that he understands the systems better. "Well, we're certainly glad to have your full attention," she said. "I've got several new projects in development that could benefit from your expertise, including a partnership with a healthcare network that will require some innovative security solution." The prospect of new technical challenges was exciting, but I found myself equally pleased by the thought of family dinner conversations, where I could share my professional experiences without having to pretend they were just hobby. The crisis at TechFlow had been stressful for everyone involved, but it had also created an opportunity for my family to see me as the complete person I'd always been. That afternoon, Rachel called me directly for the first time in months. Her voice was warm but slightly nervous, as if she wasn't sure how to navigate this new understanding of our relationship. "Diane, I wanted to thank you for helping TechFlow," she said. "Marcus told me what happened, and I realize now how skilled you must be to solve that kind of problem." "I was glad I could help," I said. "Technical emergencies can be very stressful for everyone involved. Actually, I was hoping I could ask you about something work-related," she said. "We're developing a new digital campaign that involves collecting customer data, and I'm worried about privacy and security issues. Would you be willing to look at our procedures and let me know if we're missing anything important?" The request was exactly the kind of professional collaboration I'd hoped might develop between us. "I'd be happy to review your security protocols. Data privacy in marketing is a complex area that a lot of companies don't handle as carefully as they should." "That's what I was afraid of," she said. "I've been reading about data breaches and customer privacy violations, and I don't want our company to make those kinds of mistakes." We spent 30 minutes discussing her concerns and setting up a time for me to review her campaign's security measures. It was a professional conversation between colleagues, the kind of interaction I'd wanted to have with my family for years but hadn't known how to initiate. After ending the call, I sat in my office feeling a sense of completion that had been missing from my life for a long time. The path to this point had been messy and complicated, involving professional mistakes and personal misunderstandings that I wished I could have avoided, but the destination felt right: a family relationship based on mutual respect and authentic understanding, combined with professional opportunities that challenged and satisfied me. The phone incident that had started this entire situation seemed almost trivial now, a minor misunderstanding that had revealed much larger issues about communication and assumption. My family's attempt to simplify my life by taking away my phone had indeed simplified things, just not in the way they'd intended. It had forced all of us to confront the gap between perception and reality, and ultimately led to more honest relationships than we'd had before. Later that week, Steve Patterson called to update me on TechFlow's continued recovery, and to ask for advice about implementing some additional security enhancement. It was a collegial conversation between professionals, and I was pleased to see that he'd moved past his initial defensiveness to focus on learning and improvement. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding testing procedures," he said. "Do you have any recommendations for more thorough evaluation of system changes before implementation?" We discussed several approaches to change management and testing protocols that would help prevent similar problems in the future. It was gratifying to share knowledge with someone who was genuinely interested in learning and improving their capabilities. "One more thing," Steve said, before ending the call. "I wanted you to know that several people have mentioned how professional and helpful you were during the crisis. Given the circumstances of your departure from the company, it would have been understandable if you'd been less generous with your assistance. Professional emergencies aren't about personal relationships. When systems are down and people's jobs are at risk, you do whatever you can to help resolve the situation. Well, your approach was noticed and appreciated," he said, "and if you ever decide you want to come back to TechFlow, I think you'd find a very warm welcome." The suggestion was flattering, but I knew my future lay with new challenges and opportunities. TechFlow had been an important chapter in my career, but it was time to write new one. The crisis had given me closure and demonstrated that my professional relationships there could remain positive, even after my departure. That weekend's family dinner was unlike any we'd had before. Instead of careful small talk and polite inquiries about general topics, we had substantive conversations about our respective work challenges and professional goals. Rachel shared details about her marketing campaigns and asked thoughtful questions about security best practices. Marcus talked about his project management responsibilities with a new appreciation for the technical complexity of the systems he coordinated. Most importantly, I was able to talk openly about my work at Meridian and the satisfaction I found in solving complex cybersecurity problems. My family listened with genuine interest and asked questions that showed they understood both the technical aspects and the professional significance of what I did. "I still can't believe we never knew about any of this," Rachel said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "All those times I made comments about technology addiction, you must have thought I was completely clueless. I thought you were making assumptions based on limited information," I said. "Which is something we all do when we don't have the full picture. But you had opportunities to correct our assumptions," Marcus pointed out. "Why didn't you ever just tell us what you really did for a living?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. "I think I was protecting myself as much as protecting your independence," I said. "It was easier to let you see me as a simple grandmother than to risk having my professional identity scrutinized or dismissed. But we would never have dismissed your work if we'd understood what it was. You dismissed it when you thought it was just computer games and social media," I pointed out. "I wasn't sure you'd treat it differently if you knew it was cybersecurity." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this observation. "That's a fair point," he said finally. "We did assume the worst about your relationship with technology. Maybe if we'd been more curious and less judgmental, you would have felt comfortable sharing more about your work." It was an insight that applied beyond our specific family dynamic. How many professional relationships suffered because people made assumptions about capabilities based on superficial observations? How many valuable contributions were overlooked because the contributors didn't fit expected stereotypes? The crisis at TechFlow had forced all of us to confront our assumptions and biases. And while the process had been uncomfortable, the results were more honest and respectful relationships than we'd had before. It was a lesson worth remembering as I continued building my consulting practice and developing new professional relationships. As I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of equilibrium that had been missing from my life for months. The family relationships were healthier and more authentic. The professional opportunities were challenging and rewarding, and I no longer felt the need to compartmentalize different aspects of my identity. The phone that had started this entire chain of events was sitting in my purse, no longer a source of family tension, but simply a tool that connected me to the work I loved and the people who valued my expertise. Sometimes the most significant changes come from the smallest catalysts, and sometimes the best way to simplify your life is to embrace its full complexity. 3 months after the TechFlow crisis, I was settling into a comfortable rhythm with my new life when everything changed again. This time, however, the change came in the form of an opportunity that would test everything I'd learned about balancing professional ambition with personal relationships. The call came on a Tuesday morning from someone I'd never expected to hear from again. Elizabeth Harrison, the Chief Executive Officer of CyberGuard International, one of the most prestigious cybersecurity firms in the country, was personally inviting me to consider a position that would represent the pinnacle of my career. "Walker," her voice was crisp and authoritative through the phone, "I've been following your work for several years, and I was particularly impressed by your recent consulting success with Meridian Financial. I have a proposition that I think might interest you." CyberGuard International was the kind of company that cybersecurity professionals dreamed of working for. They handled the most sophisticated threats, worked with Fortune 500 companies and government agencies, and employed some of the most talented security experts in the world. An offer from Elizabeth Harrison wasn't just a job opportunity, it was recognition of expertise at the highest levels of the industry. "I'm listening," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "We're establishing a new division focused on legacy system security," she explained. "Many large organizations have critical infrastructure that was built decades ago, often by experts who are no longer available to maintain or upgrade those systems. We need someone who can bridge the gap between old and new technologies. Someone who understands both the historical context and the modern threat landscape." The position she described was essentially a dream job for someone with my background. It would involve traveling to client sites around the world, solving complex security puzzles, and working with cutting-edge technology while applying decades of experience. The compensation package she outlined was more than generous, and the professional prestige was undeniable. "There's one complication," she continued. The position would require significant travel, sometimes for weeks at a time. We need someone who can be available on short notice for emergency consultations. I understand you have family considerations, so I wanted to be upfront about the demand. After ending the call, I sat in my home office staring out the window while processing the magnitude of what had just been offered to me. 6 months ago, my family had seen me as a technology-obsessed grandmother who needed intervention. Now I was being recruited by the most prestigious firm in my industry for a position that would represent the highest achievement of my professional career. The irony wasn't lost on me that this opportunity had emerged directly from the chain of events that started with Rachel taking away my phone. If my family hadn't forced me to confront the disconnect between my professional and personal identities, I might never have made the changes that led to the Meridian consultation that had apparently caught Elizabeth Harrison's attention. But accepting the position would mean more upheaval in family relationships that were just beginning to stabilize. Marcus and Rachel had finally started to understand and respect my professional capabilities, but they might struggle with the idea of me taking on even more demanding work responsibilities. That evening, I decided to discuss the opportunity with them over dinner. We'd established a new tradition of weekly family meals, where we could talk openly about our respective work challenges and successes. It was a far cry from the stilted conversations we'd had when they thought I was just killing time with computer games. I received an interesting job offer today, I said as we settled in with coffee after the main course. It's a significant opportunity, but it would involve some major changes. Rachel leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of opportunity? I explained Elizabeth Harrison's offer, watching their faces as I described the scope of the position and the professional recognition it represented. Marcus listened with growing amazement, while Rachel asked detailed questions about the travel requirements and client responsibility. This sounds like an incredible opportunity, Marcus said when I finished, but you just got settled with your Meridian consulting work. Are you sure you want to take on something this demanding? I'm not sure about anything, I admitted. That's why I wanted to discuss it with you. This job would represent the peak of my professional career, but it would also mean being away from home frequently and potentially missing family events. Rachel was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. Diane, can I ask you something honest? Do you feel like you missed out on career opportunities over the years because of family responsibilities? The question caught me off guard with its directness and insight. What do you mean? When Marcus was growing up, did you turn down jobs or promotions because you needed to be home with him? Did having a family limit your professional options? I thought about her question seriously before answering. There were certainly times when I chose family stability over career advancement. I could have pursued opportunities with larger companies or taken positions that required relocation, but I wanted Marcus to have a stable home environment. And now you're in your late 60s with a chance to take the kind of position you might have pursued 30 years ago, Rachel observed. The question is whether you should grab this opportunity while you can, or whether family considerations should still take priority. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Mom, you don't have to justify your career decisions to us. You've already proven that you're incredibly successful at what you do, but that's not really the point, Rachel said. The point is whether Diane should shape her professional choices around what we want, or what she wants. It was a surprisingly mature perspective from someone who, just months earlier, had dismissed my work as a technology addiction. Rachel was recognizing something that I was still struggling to articulate, that my professional identity deserved to exist independently from my family role. What do you want to do? Marcus asked directly. I want to take the job, I said, surprising myself with the immediacy of my response. It would be challenging work with the most sophisticated clients in the industry. I'd be solving problems that most people my age would never get the chance to tackle. Then you should take it, Rachel said firmly. We're both adults with our own careers and responsibilities. You don't need to structure your life around being available for Sunday dinners. Marcus nodded slowly. Rachel's right. We've been selfish expecting you to always be available when we want family time. You have your own goals and ambitions that are just as important as ours. The conversation continued for another hour, exploring the practical implications of my potential career change and the adjustments we'd all need to make. By the end of the evening, I felt like I had not just their permission, but their active encouragement to pursue this opportunity. The next morning, I called Elizabeth Harrison and accepted her offer. The decision felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like jumping off a cliff while trusting that I'd built wings strong enough to fly. The transition to CyberGuard International happened quickly. Within 2 weeks, I was in their Washington headquarters for orientation and initial training. The company culture was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Intense, intellectually demanding, and populated by people who lived and breathed cybersecurity challenge. My first assignment took me to a financial institution in Singapore that was struggling with security vulnerabilities in a trading system built in the. The original architects had long since retired, and the current IT staff was afraid to make changes that might destabilize the entire network. Working in Singapore was professionally exhilarating and personally challenging. The technical problems were complex enough to require every skill I'd developed over 4 decades in cybersecurity. But the cultural and logistical challenges of working in a foreign environment added layers of complexity I hadn't anticipated. The client team was initially skeptical about my capabilities, clearly expecting CyberGuard to send someone younger and more conventional looking. But within the first day of analyzing their systems, I'd identified security gaps that their internal team had missed, and proposed solutions that would strengthen their network without disrupting critical trading operations. How did you know to look for vulnerabilities in the timestamp verification protocols? Asked Dr. Liu, their chief technology officer, after I'd demonstrated a potential attack vector that could have been exploited to manipulate transaction records. Experience with legacy systems teaches you to pay attention to components that newer architects might overlook, I explained. Timestamp verification was implemented differently in the 1980s, and those older approaches can create unexpected vulnerabilities when integrated with modern networks. The project took 3 weeks to complete, and by the end, the Singapore team was treating me with the kind of professional respect I'd always hoped to earn but had never experienced at this level. They weren't just polite or accommodating, they were genuinely impressed by my technical capabilities and strategic thinking. More importantly, I was doing work that felt meaningful and significant. The security improvements we implemented would protect billions of dollars in daily trading activity and ensure the integrity of financial transactions that affected economic systems around the world. It was the kind of high-stakes problem-solving that made all the travel and long hours worthwhile. When I returned to the United States, I found that news of my success in Singapore had already reached Elizabeth Harrison. She called me into her office for a debriefing that turned into a strategic planning session for future assignment. The Singapore project exceeded everyone's expectations, she said. Dr. Liu specifically requested that you be assigned to their upcoming system modernization project, which would be a 6-month engagement starting next year. The prospect of extended international consulting was both exciting and daunting. It would mean being away from home for longer periods, but it would also represent the kind of career achievement that most cybersecurity professionals could only dream about. There's something else, Elizabeth continued. I'm considering you for promotion to senior principal consultant, which would make you one of only 12 people at that level in the entire company. It would come with significant additional compensation and the authority to lead major client engagements independently. I felt a rush of professional pride that was unlike anything I'd experienced in my career. To be considered for such a position at my age, in an industry that often prioritized youth and conventional credentials over experience and wisdom, felt like vindication of every choice I'd made over the past 4 decades. But accepting the promotion would mean committing to an even more demanding travel schedule, and taking on responsibilities that would consume most of my time and energy. It would be the kind of career pinnacle that required sacrificing other aspects of life. That weekend I had another long conversation with Marcus and Rachel about the trajectory my career was taking. This time, however, The dynamic was completely different from our previous discussion. Instead of treating my professional choices as something that needed to be managed around family expectations, they approached the conversation as equals discussing respective career decisions. You're not just technically skilled, you're exceptionally talented at what you do, Marcus nodded. I've been thinking about our conversation when you took the cyberguard job. I realized that for years I've been expecting you to prioritize our convenience over your professional growth. That wasn't fair to you. Family relationships require balance, I said. I don't want to become so focused on work that I lose touch with the people who matter to me, but we don't want you to sacrifice career opportunities because you're worried about disappointing us, Rachel replied. We're all adults here. We can adapt our expectations to support your goals instead of expecting you to limit your goals to meet our expectations. The maturity and generosity of their perspective moved me deep. They were offering me something I'd never felt entirely free to claim, the right to pursue professional ambitions without guilt or apology. There's something else I want to discuss, I said. If I take this promotion, I'll be traveling internationally for extended periods. That means I won't be available for regular family dinners or routine support when you have problems. We'll figure it out, Marcus said. Rachel and I are both capable of handling our own challenges, and we can maintain our relationship through video calls and messages when you're traveling. Besides, Rachel added with a smile, now that we know what you actually do for a living, your travel stories will be a lot more interesting than they used to be. Over the following weeks, I found myself settling into a new equilibrium that balanced professional demands with personal relationships in ways I'd never managed before. The key difference was honesty about priorities and capabilities rather than trying to maintain artificial boundaries between different aspects of my life. My second major assignment took me to a healthcare network in Germany that was upgrading patient record systems while maintaining compatibility with legacy databases that contain decades of critical medical information. It was exactly the kind of complex integration challenge that the new position had been designed to address. Working in Frankfurt was professionally rewarding and personally educational. The German approach to cybersecurity was methodical and thorough in ways that complemented my own analytical style, and I found myself learning new techniques from colleagues who approached familiar problems from different cultural and technical perspectives. The project required 4 weeks on site, during which I maintained regular contact with Marcus and Rachel through video calls and messaging. Instead of feeling guilty about being away from home, I was able to share my experiences and insights with family members who were genuinely interested in my professional adventure. They have privacy protections that are much more comprehensive than what we see in the United States, but they're implemented in ways that don't compromise system functionality. Rachel asked thoughtful questions about the intersection between healthcare privacy and digital marketing, while Marcus was curious about project management approaches in different cultural contexts. Our conversations had evolved from polite family check-ins to substantive professional discussions between colleagues who happened to be related. When I returned from Germany, Elizabeth Harrison offered me the senior principal consultant promotion officially. The conversation took place in her corner office, overlooking downtown Washington, and I felt a sense of professional accomplishment that was both deeply satisfying and slightly surreal. You've exceeded every expectation we had when we hired you, she said. Your technical expertise is obviously exceptional, but what sets you apart is your ability to understand client needs and build trust with teams that are initially skeptical. That's a rare combination of skills. I've had decades to develop those skills, I said. Experience teaches you how to read people and situations as much as it teaches you about technology. Exactly, she said. That's why this promotion makes sense for both you and the company. We need senior consultants who can handle the most complex client relationships, not just the most complex technical problems. Accepting the promotion felt like claiming an identity I'd been building toward my entire career. It represented recognition not just of technical capabilities, but of the wisdom and judgment that comes from decades of professional experience. It was the kind of achievement that proved my career choices had been valuable and meaningful. That evening, I called my family to share the news. Their responses reflected how much our relationships had evolved over the past year. "Mom, that's incredible," Marcus said. You're basically at the top of your field now. I can't believe we used to worry about you spending too much time on your computer." Rachel laughed at his comment. "Looking back, it's embarrassing how wrong we were about everything." "Diane, do you realize that you're probably one of the most successful cybersecurity professionals in the country? I'm certainly one of the most experienced, and I'm grateful that I get to keep learning and growing professionally at this stage of my life." "What's your next assignment?" Marcus asked. "I'll be leading a team assessment of critical infrastructure vulnerabilities for a major utility company," I said. "It's the kind of high-stakes project that could affect millions of people if we don't get it right." The conversation continued for over an hour, with both Marcus and Rachel asking detailed questions about my new responsibilities and expressing genuine pride in my professional achievement. It was the kind of family discussion I'd imagined having for years, but had never quite known how to initiate. Over the following months, I settled into the demanding rhythm of senior-level consulting work. Each assignment brought new technical challenges and required me to work with clients who had high expectations and complex requirements. The work was intellectually stimulating and professionally satisfying in ways that made the long hours and frequent travel worthwhile. More importantly, I was finally living without the artificial boundaries that had previously separated my professional and personal identities. Marcus and Rachel knew exactly what I did for a living, respected my expertise, and supported my career decision. I no longer felt the need to downplay my accomplishments or hide my professional ambitions. The transformation in our family dynamics was perhaps the most significant outcome of the entire experience. We'd moved from relationships based on assumptions and incomplete information to relationships based on mutual respect and honest communication. Instead of trying to fit into simplified roles that made everyone comfortable, we were engaging with each other as complete, complex people with individual goals and capability. One evening, nearly a year after the phone incident that had started everything, Rachel called me with a professional question about a cybersecurity issue she was facing at work. The conversation was technical and detailed, the kind of discussion I would have had with any professional colleague. "I really appreciate having someone I can call about these kinds of problems," she said after we'd worked through her question. "It's amazing to have a cybersecurity expert in the family. It's amazing to have family members who understand and respect what I do." "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I keep thinking about that night when we took your phone away. We thought we were helping you, but we were actually dismissing everything that mattered to you professionally. You were operating with incomplete information." I said. "We all make decisions based on what we think we know, but we should have been curious enough to ask better questions," she said. "Instead of assuming you were addicted to technology, we should have wondered why technology was so important to you." It was an insight that extended far beyond our specific family situation. How many professional relationships suffer because people make assumptions about capabilities based on superficial observation? How many valuable contributions are overlooked because the contributors don't fit expected stereotypes? The experience had taught all of us about the importance of curiosity over judgment, of asking questions rather than making assumptions, and of respecting expertise regardless of how it's packaged. These were lessons that applied to every aspect of our personal and professional life. As I prepared for my next international assignment, this time a 6-month project in Australia that would involve designing security protocols for a new financial trading platform, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing from my life for years. The professional recognition was deeply satisfying, but the personal growth was even more significant. I'd learned to claim my expertise without apology, to pursue ambitious goals without guilt, and to maintain authentic relationships that honored both my professional capabilities and my family connection. The phone that had started this entire chain of events was sitting on my desk, no longer a source of family tension, but simply a tool that connected me to work I loved and people who valued my contribution. Sometimes the most significant changes come from the smallest catalysts, and sometimes the best way to simplify your life is to embrace its full complexity. My family had tried to simplify my life by taking away my phone, assuming I was too dependent on technology. What they discovered was that I wasn't dependent on technology at all. I was an expert who controlled technology to protect and serve others. In trying to disconnect me from what they saw as an addiction, They had inadvertently forced me to reveal my true capabilities and claim the recognition I'd earned through decades of specialized work. The irony was perfect. In their attempt to limit my engagement with technology, they had enabled me to achieve the highest levels of professional success in a technology-driven field. Their misguided intervention had become the catalyst for the most rewarding period of my career and the most honest period of our family relationships. Looking ahead, I could see years of challenging projects, international travel, and continued professional growth. But more importantly, I could see family relationships built on genuine understanding and mutual respect, where each person was valued for their complete identity, rather than simplified versions that made everyone comfortable. The future was complex and demanding, but it was authentically mine, and that I thought was worth every uncomfortable conversation and professional risk we'd navigated to get here. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.